Hi everyone, today we are going to look at effective ways to teach learners the basics of fractions. This video covers introducing the concept of fractions by sharing an object, sharing a group of items, naming fractions and writing fractions as numbers. Let's start by revising grade 3 concepts. At this level, learners should be able to recognize that sharing is the same as dividing. Remember that all sharing or dividing must be done equally. Resources to help teach this concept are diagrams of shapes or objects like pictures of slices of bread or cake where dividing into equal parts can be demonstrated. You will start by getting learners to understand the concept of sharing an object equally and then correctly naming the parts of the object as a fraction. For example, if an apple is to be shared among 4 friends, then the apple is cut into 4 equal parts. Each part of the apple would then be referred to as 1/4. Each friend would receive 1/4 of the apple. Be careful that you do not encourage learners to say that each friend receives 1 out of 4 pieces of the apple. If taught this way, learners will start to see the fraction as 2 different numbers, instead 1/4 being the number. Learners at this point do not need to write this as a fraction, but must be able to identify that one part of an object that has been cut into 4 equal parts is called 1/4. To teach terminology, you could use flashcards showing different fractions and get the learners to match each terminology flashcard with the correct diagram, such as these here. You could also provide learners with a shape and ask them to cut the shape into, for example, 6 equal parts. Learners can then be asked to put the shape back together and name each part as they reassemble the shape. This activity will show learners that if we put the 6 equal parts back together, it would form one whole object. Next, you will help learners understand the concept of sharing a group of items equally. Examples of resources you can use to teach this concept is to use a small bag of sweets, marbles, or toys that can be shared equally among a group of learners. Use items or pictures that learners can relate to or engage with. If we tell learners that there are 6 sweets in the bag and that the sweets need to be divided equally among 3 learners, learners must identify that the total number of sweets is 6 sweets. They must then be able to determine that 6 sweets make up one whole bag. If the 6 sweets are divided equally among 3 learners, each learner would receive 2 sweets, meaning that each learner would receive 2/6 of the bag of sweets. At this point, it's important to make the connection that sharing is the same as dividing, that learners can correctly name the fraction in words. Before you tackle the main grade 4 concepts, learners should be comfortable in identifying the parts of a whole and the parts of a group of objects. This will now be expanded into the key concepts that are required for learners to understand fractions in grade 4. Key concepts include naming fractions, identifying the numerator and denominator, writing fractions as a number. Writing fractions as a number is important as it will help learners to compare and order fractions as they progress in grade 4. You will need the following resources: fraction charts or fraction walls, and once again, diagrams of shapes or everyday object where you can demonstrate to learners the equal parts of the object. Fraction walls or charts, when used effectively, help to name the fraction and write the fraction as numbers. It is also used to help learners compare the sizes of fractions and to eventually order fractions from biggest to smallest or smallest to biggest. It also helps to show learners that putting together the parts of a fraction will create one whole object. It is recommended that the fraction wall or chart is placed in the classroom and is visible to all learners when teaching fractions. We are going to start with how to help learners write fractions in the correct format. Using a diagram, we will now demonstrate to learners how to name, identify, and write the fraction as a number. A circle is divided into 4 equal parts. The number of equal parts that make up the whole object is always the denominator. Therefore, in this example, the denominator is 4. 3 equal parts of the object are shaded. get learners to name the parts that are shaded. At this point, learners would name the shaded part 3/4. But how would they write this as a fraction? The number of shaded parts of the object is 3. This is the numerator. The numerator is placed at the top of the fraction line, and the denominator is the number on the bottom. Therefore, the fraction of the shaded area as a number is 3/4. To test learner understanding, ask them to write down the fraction of the unshaded area of the diagram. Learners should be able to tell you that it would be 1/4. Use fun methods of helping learners remember which is the numerator and the denominator. You could teach them the NU in numerator stands for never under, and that there is a D in denominator and a D in down. The numerator is therefore always on top and the denominator on the bottom of the fraction. You could make learners do the fraction dance by asking them to point to the ceiling when you say numerator and point to the floor when you say denominator, to help them remember that the numerator is at the top of the fraction and the denominator is at the bottom of the fraction. Now that learners have practiced identifying the parts of a fraction by looking at equal parts of one object, go back to the example of sharing a group of objects shown earlier in the video. To recap, if the 6 sweets are divided equally among 3 learners, each learner would receive 2/6 of the bag of sweets. Ask learners to write the sharing of the sweets as a fraction. Learners should identify that the total number of sweets is 6, so that would be the denominator. The number of sweets that each learner received is 2, so that would be the numerator. The fraction would therefore be 2/6. Make sure learners have many opportunities to practice naming and writing the fraction when sharing a group of items. Another example you could use to involve your learners is to choose 8 learners and ask them what their favorite sport is. According to their responses, the rest of the class must write down the fraction of learners that select each sport. It is important that learners are familiar with the correct terminology. Emphasize that fractions look at the division of equal parts. Learners must practice and understand the difference between the numerator and denominator, and how to use diagrams to determine the fraction. Use as many visuals as possible, diagrams or objects that can be brought into the classroom to help learners correctly identify fractions. Include songs or videos in your lesson to make fractions come to life and help learners remember important concepts. Have fun with the learners by including relevant, real-life examples of where fractions are used. A great example of this is using recipes. Go through a simple recipe with the class and ask them that if a cake recipe asks for a 1/2 cup of sugar, what do you think would happen to the cake if you put less than 1/2 cup of sugar? It would not taste sweet like a cake anymore. Tell them why fractions are important in a recipe for measuring ingredients when baking or cooking. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Like, comment, or share if you found this video helpful.